Okay. Good afternoon. It is Tuesday, June 3rd at 6 p.m., and we are convening the meeting of the Code and Charter Review Committee at the Life Saving Station in Dewey Beach. This meeting is also being live streamed via Zoom. As chairman of the committee, I, Dave Lyons, officially call to order the meeting. This meeting is being convened in accordance with the rules of the state of Delaware and the town of Dewey Beach. So we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'm going to do roll call in just a second. I'll let everybody know we're having some video issues broadcasting out, but we can see you, and we can also, any of the documents are all posted online. So if you want to reference them while you're online, you can take a look. We can bring them up here in the room. So I think everything's posted. We're all here, everybody can hear one another, so we'll make sure everyone's heard and has a chance to speak. So let's do a roll call of committee members. I'll start with those in the room. Jimmy O'Connor, present. Diane? Present. David?
Present.
And on the line, I see Marcia? Present. Marcia? And then also, Elaine, are you online?
Present.
Okay, thanks, Elaine. We'll go ahead and do town.
Yes, I'm present. Sorry.
That's all right. We'll do town officials. I know Dawn's not here tonight, but we have Jim Dedes.
Thank you.
And Fred. Jesus, sorry,
Fred.
Fred. Sorry, Fred. Bill Zolper, excuse me.
Thank you.
And Commissioner Persinger.
Blue.
I think that's everyone. Okay. So the first action today is to adopt the agenda for today's meeting. Can I get a motion to adopt?
I'll make a motion to adopt the agenda for tonight's meeting.
Thank you. Second?
I'll second
Thank you, David. All in favor?
it. Aye.
Aye. All right, it's unanimous. Next item, to approve the minutes from December 11th, 2024. You're posted, and I also sent them all to everybody. Can I get a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion to approve.
David. Second? Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye? Okay, it's unanimous. So as we go here, I'm going to open public discussion on each item as we consider it. I want to just do the public discussion on each item as we go. And we have good stuff. So are there any general comments right now from the public? Anybody in the room or online have any general comments before we get started? Okay. Any comments from the committee members?
I briefly read it. What is the 5-second summary of the reason to look at this chapter 173 regarding tree removal?
I'm going to open that, and I'm going to get you started right away. Okay. So we're going to open to the first agenda item, discuss possible amendments to chapter 173, code regarding tree removal and replacement. The committee may vote on recommendations to the town council. So at this point, I'm going to open the agenda item. So Dave, I'm going to answer your question. I'm going to ask Jim to feed in for us.
Great, thank you.
And then Steve from Complete Tree is also here to provide some subject matter expertise if we'd like. So we've talked about the tree ordinance several times. The intent was to preserve the natural canopy of trees in the town. I think we've fine-tuned the ordinance as we've learned, as we've gone through and actually had real life experience. So one of the things we've been asked to talk about today is the tree limitations, or the size of their placement. And so with that, I'd like to have Jim Dedes just kind of give us a background from the town's perspective, what they've been encountering. So let him start, and then let Steve give us some information, and we'll have discussion.
Okay, just a brief summary. If a tree is taken down and an arborist approves it, the town requires a tree to be replaced, and they have a certain period of time to replacement. The issue is not so much a replacement of the tree, although the number may be a problem, but the bigger issue is the size of the caliper. And the caliper is really the diameter of the tree trunk, I believe measured at 20 inches above the root ball. The problem we've run into is the size of the root ball and the size of the tree is very difficult for a lot of property owners and actually arborists to plant it and ensure that it's going to be a safe tree and it'll be a healthy tree. And the reason is the limitations of a home being built and the size of the 50 by 100 foot lots. And if people build out to the 8 foot side setback on each one, and the back set, which is 12 feet in the NR district, the issue becomes where am I going to place this tree? Now, when they take down the tree, before we issue a permit, we ask for where they're going to put it. And we get a site plan of where it's going to be. And from what we have encountered, and this is with several tree companies and arborists talking to us, that it is difficult to first of all find a tree. A lot of times you have to go out of state to get a tree that size. It's extremely expensive. And their concern is if they place the tree in a certain setback area where the house is located, it may not survive, or in time it's going to have to be pulled out one way or the other. From what I've heard is that they're saying that they would prefer, where it possible, to go to a reduction in the size of the caliper, again, the diameter of the tree. And Dawn and I, the building official, have discussed it, and we've discussed it with some of our arborists, and I believe Steve Dodano is here this evening, representing Complete Tree Care, but he also represents, we use him as our arborist if there are any issues regarding tree removals. So that's it in a nutshell. And the fines are expensive. It's a $1,000 fine. If you don't do it, you have 90 days afterwards to the tree is removed to plant it. So there are some issues that we think it might be worth revisiting this.
So just so everyone knows, the change is in 173 section C, it is A2, currently reads minimum circumference measured 1 foot above ground of 15 inches. And next item is minimum height of 12 feet when planted. So the suggestion is a minimum diameter measured 1 foot above the ground of 3 inches and a minimum of 12 feet when planted. So that's what we have. So the difference before is and Steve, I'm going to have you, if you don't mind coming up and just talking in the microphone.
No, thank you.
I think it would be, if you could take a second, maybe the difference, maybe diameter versus circumference, and any thoughts you have on the size of the trees.
Sure. So my name's Steve Dodonna, staff arborist with Complete Tree Care. Blessed to have developed a great relationship with this city and multiple residents of this city. So it's a pleasure to be here. And like I said, more than willing to help throughout this process. But in regards to this particular matter, as Jim stated, there are a couple inherent difficulties with the size that is currently being asked to be placed. Number one is sourcing, but actually more so than that is the ability to get it into the property. We've experienced multiple times in the old northeast section of the town where they still have the cottages and they have the partitions set up and things like that. A tree that size, you cannot by hand take it into a property and manipulate it and get it where you want to go. You have to use a machine. And to use a machine requires access that is very rarely available, even if it's a new home that's being constructed. And so that is one of the major things. And a tree for a tree sometimes can become an issue because we get to overplanting, and the trees that are required to be planted are going to have a certain canopy spread. And I love the fact that the city wants to maintain a tree canopy. But trees that size that we're talking about right now, it's very hard to get them where we need to get them and to plant them. And, I don't know if, like with a new home, if they take out 10 trees, they don't normally have to plant 10, correct?
They do in the way it's currently been asked, Jim. So let me ask the question. When someone comes in with a plan, part of what the town requires is a landscape plan. Just like they provide their limitations on the size of a house, the setbacks of a house, the height of a house. One of the things the town asks for is a plan for what trees are they going to take down, because they have to approve the trees being taken down. And then what's the plan to replant them?
Right.
And I think so far the town has been able to, manage the replacement of trees has worked with individual homeowners. And I'll let Jim kind of step in on that or just answers that as well. But my understanding is that's not been such a problem as we've been able to kind of address it on a one-off, one-by-one
Right.
issue with the
Okay.
homeowner.
Yep.
So,
Jim?
Jim, is that accurate?
I think you're absolutely accurate. And the other issue is, and to talk about maneuvering, getting it in, a lot of times there are other sizable trees on properties. So to maneuver it in and plant it becomes difficult, and you run into roots being damaged potentially. So our sense was, and I think Dawn and I speak on behalf of our experience, we think that it should be considered to be reduced to a 3-inch caliper, and take a look at the number of trees that have to be placed in a. Right now, if you have 20 trees, and I'm exaggerating, but in a footprint, I guess the requirement would be is that you have to replace 20 trees, the way it works. And that is to us, that seems like an unreasonable amount of burden that would be placed on the property owner, and furthermore, the location of the tree.
And in that regard, I can speak specifically of a property in the northeast section where the tree was a dead tree. And it was right off the corner of the house, presented great risk of liability. The lot had 24 trees on it, not including the dead one. And the ability, having to plant a tree was, and like Jim said, not only, like I said earlier, in those older cottage, I think it's a value that some of these homeowners maintain that old charm with the cottages, and they have those kind of partitions up. And then typically a lot of the trees are right at the front of the property. So it was impossible for us to be able to plant a tree of the current size for that homeowner.
So it wasn't an issue with the dead tree, right? I mean, there was no issue taking the dead tree down, was there?
No issue with getting but they did have to, in the initial aspect, they were required to plant a tree. And then I presented the information that to do that, we wouldn't be able to get it in there. We could get a smaller one in there that we could hand carry in and get to there. And ultimately, I don't believe they had to plant a tree, which I think was a good solution. A property with 20 trees already on it, if a tree needs to come out, I don't really see where there's value in making them plant another tree. Especially when we look at other situations where, a lot ends up newly developed and they might have 4 trees on it, and most of them ornamental trees, not hardwood canopy trees like oak trees and the kind of trees that I believe that we as a city would be looking to maintain that treescape, right? We want to think about trees that can develop a canopy that adds to the aesthetic and presence of the city. Right now, most of the trees that probably get planted are ornamental trees that satisfy the requirement, but I don't know how well that affects the actual, goal of tree density and hardwood canopy. Rehoboth has a minimum density requirement. So, and I don't know the exact numbers of how that works, but if you want to take out a tree and you still have minimum density, you don't have to plant a tree. So something to consider for this city moving forward would be something like that, where if we already meet a certain expected diameter of trees, then if a tree does need to come out, it doesn't necessitate actually having to put a new tree in.
I believe the city of Rehoboth also takes a look at the canopy that's existing when the home is started, and then what the canopy, we can confirm that, but I believe it's the canopy that they insist on being restored on the lot.
Right. Well, I've always been dealt with diameter at breast height.
Right.
So never have I been, in my experience, presented with, well, you're taking out this beautiful oak tree with this beautiful spread, and you have to put that kind of tree back in. They do make you select from a list of trees that are, Delaware native species trees. And they have two separate lists. One is a list of hardwood trees, and then one is a list of what we call ornamental or additional trees.
Pretty sure our requirement is it's just a Delaware
It's the
native.
same.
Delaware, is it same? I thought it was Delaware native for sure.
native species trees.
Yeah,
to
native
replace,
species
yeah.
trees.
But, you know, I mean, all trees are going to fight for the available nutrition. You know, our soil here in southern Delaware, 2 to 3 feet of a sandy loam and then hard clay underneath that. The soil is not conducive to multiple trees and tree roots everywhere. You know, a lot with multiple trees on it, they're going to fight for survival, and some of the weaker ones will lose. That's how we get, you know, the dead trees that we do get in the landscape.
Okay, thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. I want
Thanks,
to,
Steve.
I want to see if there's any public comment, and then I'm going to ask the commissioners. Go ahead, Kate,
Your video feed is back
oh, thank you, all
on.
right.
See you.
So everybody, oh, all right, I won't embarrass myself. So there's no one else here in the room, so I'm going to assume there's no public comment in the room. Oh, come on. Is there anybody online, less committee members that has a comment, wants to make a comment?
Are you guys talking about committee members?
Not yet, not
Okay.
yet. Just let me cover off the public, and then I'm going to ask the committee members, okay? All right, with that, why don't we go around and committee has questions. David started, and Marcia, you can be next if that's okay? Okay.
Thank you, Steve,
Do
appreciate
you
it.
guys have any questions for me?
I'm gonna bring up some ideas
Okay.
that, just to bounce off you.
All right.
From a 15-inch minimum caliber to a 3-inch seems extreme.
That,
Couple of ideas, maybe.
So
Let me
the
just finish.
caliper, I don't think, Jim, were you talking 3-inch caliper or 3-inch diameter?
I'm talking, it's both the same. A caliper and diameter are diameters, but the 15
Well, the
inch.
caliper number is larger.
Yeah, but it's the 3-inch that we're talking about. Even if you go with a 5-inch caliper, if you multiply that around, it's approximately a little over 15 inches in circumference.
So just so I'm clear, let's get a few terms down here for everybody. So the diameter is from one side of the trunk to the other, right?
Correct.
That's it? So we measure 1 foot up from the ground, that is, so we're suggesting, that's what we're suggesting. Our current code says a circumference 1 foot above the ground is 15 feet. Does that
No,
mean
I
1
think it
foot
says
around
20.
the outside?
20 inches right now.
It's 20? I have the code.
It says of less than 20 inches, measured 1 foot above. That's all. But
That's circumference.
Yeah.
The
that's
diameter.
correct. It's 1
Yeah,
foot. up.
circumference.
Absolutely right.
Yeah, so currently it reads circumference, measured 1 foot above the ground at
That's a round number.
around.
Yeah.
Diameter is a straight line.
So Steve, let me ask you, if I were talking about a tree that had a circumference of 15 inches, what would the diameter be?
Like a 7.5. So
40
you can
40.
take the circumference and divide it by pi, 3.14. and that will give
3.14.
you-
It'd be about 45 inches in circumference. A little bit more.
I'm sorry,
So right now, the way the code is written is you're talking about almost a 5-inch diameter
Right, that's what I wanted to
tree,
get.
okay? And that's what your code actually, that's with 15 inches, that's what, you know, that breaks down to is 4.777. That is a huge root ball. I mean, a 3-inch caliper or 3-inch diameter tree, and I use the term at breast height. So the caliper height at the base or 1 foot above the ground is going to be less or more,
Right.
right? But you know, the 3-inch even is going to be of a balled and burlap. You know, it's going to be a tree that's spaded out of the ground, and it too is going to have a generous root ball, but not anywhere near the size of the other.
of the other one, right?
Yeah.
So so if you want to put it down, we're going from a 5-inch diameter to a 3-inch diameter.
I'd just like to follow up.
I'm sorry?
I still have a little
Yeah,
follow-up.
go ahead. Yeah, I just want to make sure we've got our terms clear.
Right. Regardless of the diameter of the caliber, if we're going to remove, for argument's sake, a large tree, my first comment was 3 inches seems a little light. Maybe we put in 4 3-inch trees to replace the big tree, or we buy a tree at a smaller caliber that we know future growth will take it to the max.
Right.
You can handle it better, you don't need a crane to bring it in, and,
Yeah,
it's
so
like-
you could do that where you took, okay, one tree at this height or this diameter and break it into two with smaller caliper to account for
Yeah.
the required.
that's why I use 3 and 15, I figured almost 4 trees to replace the big 15-inch tree.
Well, and then the thing that you also have to then worry about is as those trees mature,
Yeah.
looking at overcrowding.
Well, they don't have to be in the same spot as the dead tree, you could, you know,
The problem I see most of the time is, in the new construction there's very little room allotted for the ability to plant a tree that's going to become an oak tree
Yeah.
or whether we reduce the size of the tree as the requirement to plant it, the future of that tree, certainly don't want to plant a tree like that any closer than
Right.
12 feet from the foundation of the
Right.
home.
right,
Especially again here in Sussex County where roots don't tap down into the ground. The only tree that really taps into our ground is a sycamore tree.
yeah,
That's why they line every old highway here in Sussex County.
yeah,
And so subsequently we get a lot more root spread,
yeah.
and
Yeah, and I've thought about that. So we could put these replacement trees anywhere on the lot. It
correct.
doesn't have to go where the dead tree is. 2 more questions. To restrict the growth of the roots for foundation, sidewalks, do we use tree pits here?
Okay,
We use a tree pit to restrict the growth of that tree, spreading roots?
that's a
And my-
great
my-
idea.
and my
To
last
create
question
a
is-
centralized root ball area that
Yeah,
forces.
tree
the roots-
pits, I've used them, and they could be precast or whatever, plastic. And my last question is, chapter 173 lists the species of the trees.
No, there's a separate addendum, I believe. that-
There is an addendum attached to it. There were just so many trees, and we follow the Department of Natural Resources that are trees that are specific to the state. So they get a list of all of that and refer them to that list, and we verify it with the arborist.
Yeah. So have we thought about to protect the foundations and public areas, sidewalks, introducing when applicable, a tree pit?
Okay.
That's it.
Okay.
Yeah, and I mean,
Good
and now, due to what's happening all across the country,
Yeah.
and probably all across the world, they are actively every year working on more hardwood columnar trees.
Yeah.
That don't have the growth habit but are still an oak tree. But
You can
again,
stymie that growth with the
you're
tree.
getting like
Yeah.
Washington monuments all around your,
Yeah.
area, and you lose that, majestic kind of,
Yeah,
historical tree canopy.
okay, thank you.
Marcia?
Yeah, okay. Just a couple comments. First, I want to say in full disclosure, because everybody knows I own a number of properties in the North End. I've planted more trees voluntarily in excess of what the code would require me to plant at every one of my properties. So I have no personal interest in this. On my 4 Jersey properties, I planted a total of 24 trees across those properties. I've been a huge advocate of maintaining trees, and that's why I plant more trees on my properties than probably anyone. But I also recognize that there's a danger in planting trees too close to the foundation, and certainly the size that we're requiring to be planted. I think the issue is twofold. I don't think it's reasonable to be focused on you take 10 trees out of the buildable footprint. The buildable footprint is there to allow you to remove and construct your house. And while we are highly focused on preservation of trees, and I certainly have been a participant in that throughout the entire North End, I think it is unsafe to plant a tree, as Steve said, more than 20 feet, 18, 20 feet from the house that's going to grow to be 30, 40 foot high. all of the arborist websites will tell you that those trees, any tree that's going to grow to be 30, 40 feet high should be planted a minimum of 20 feet from the foundation of the house. We don't have that in any of our setbacks. We have 8 sides, 12 back, 18 front. We don't even have the minimum required by arborists to plant a tree that'll be a canopy tree. So I think there's things that are twofold. We go to the unreasonableness standard in terms of our 50 by 100 foot lots. We also go to a safety standard that now we're an official town entity requiring a tree that is an unsafe planting location to be planted. And I mean, guys, I think it's a liability issue that we would have a code that would require an oak tree that's going to grow to be 50, 60 feet to be planted 4 feet from a house. And what I want to show you is this is a house on Carolina Street. These trees were what they were required to be planted. These are 2 oak trees that are going to grow to be 40 or 50 feet. They are 4 feet from the foundation of the one property and 4 feet from the property line of the other house. The other property owner is hugely concerned that they are going to have a 40 to 50 foot oak tree planted 8 feet plus 4, 12 feet between 2 properties. So I think there's 2 things. I think we have to look at reasonableness. Is it reasonable to require 10 trees that are removed in your footprint, which allows you to build, to require you to plant 10 trees, 8 side yard, 12 back, 18 front, when the minimum standard for a canopy tree is 20 feet from the property line? That just, I mean, we have to accept that's not reasonable to require that. And then we have to look at, is it a liability issue if we are making it mandatory as a code requirement as a town to plant a canopy tree on what the industry assumes and has validated is an unsafe area to plant. So if we require this and that tree grows to be 30 feet and falls on the house, and the town required it as code, knowing it is not a safe, it's not a safe standard for the industry, I think we have a problem. I think the other thing is the root ball size, which Steve brought up, and I think we just have to be reasonable. In an 8-foot setback, we should have nothing but a crepe myrtle or a decorative tree. In a 12-foot setback, you really can't have a tree that's going to grow higher than 20 feet. In an 18-foot setback in the front, same. You need a 20-foot setback from all industry standards to build to plant a canopy tree. So I just want us to not be so focused on, we took 10 trees out, let's put 10 trees back. Is that reasonable and is it safe? And I think the answer is no.
Okay, so
I mean,
Marcia, if I understand you're saying, it's the reasonableness of the replacement of trees so close to a home, since we have the setbacks the way it's set up.
And safety. I think safety is the #1 issue.
Okay.
In this picture I showed you, these are 2 oak trees planted 4 feet because this is the only place they could plant them, and they were required. They had to plant 4 on this side of their house. It's 4 feet from the foundation of the current house, and it's 4 feet from the property line of the other house.
So I get that. I understand that. That's what we talked about here. And you made your point. So I just want to make sure that everybody else has the chance to speak. Elaine, do you have any comments you want to make?
Hey, Mark, it's Elaine. I do have a question about the arborist that is there. It's not just about shade, isn't it about dealing with sucking up the water when there's a lot of rain? And that's one of the reasons many cities say you can't take down trees because you'll cause floods, and you'll see soil being, rushed away if, and I get you, Marcia, about like what you're talking about, but don't we also need to have trees that are sucking up water so that we don't have flooded streets like they do in Bethany? Isn't this one of the ways you can deal with nature? Not just about the beautifulness of our town and having, you know, the canopy that you're talking about, but I'm talking environmentally. Aren't trees the best way to help in a seaside town, especially one that does grow trees? I know they're not necessarily always the perfect trees, but I just wanted to ask Marcia because I know she owns a lot of properties and she cares about the town. Like, how would you deal with that particular issue?
So on my properties, Elaine, we've selected and we've overplanted, but we've selected trees that work in the setbacks that won't need to be removed once they are 4 to 5 years old and have root spreads that will be conducive to the clay and the soil. And Steve's right, a oak tree root, a maple or oak that you might want for a canopy tree, or even our coveted loblollies, which I have planted many, but they are not stable trees in terms of their root ball. They have a very unstable root ball, and when you plant them in soil and clay, it's a problem. So I think we just have to better define our conditions and not necessarily, okay, you take 8 trees out, you have to put 8 trees back and have a canopy. That's not practical for our conditions. It's not safe. And I think it does become a liability issue if we require it under code that you plant a tree that's going to grow to a canopy of 40 feet, 4 feet from your property, from your foundation. So that's how we've dealt with it. I think the current code would not be permissible. And I also think there's an issue of crowding that Steve has focused on. If you take down 10 trees and have to plant 10 trees in your 18-foot front setback because you don't have enough room in an 8-foot, and you barely have enough room in a 12-foot to plant more than a tree that'll grow 15 to 18 feet, certainly not a canopy tree. I think that you're going to have an overcrowding root issue. You're going to have collapse of those trees, rot, and quite frankly, the trees that are planted between these two houses, the 12-foot oak and or maple, I'm not sure, Steve, by the leaf what they are, but I know these are canopy trees. They are probably going to have to be removed in 4 to 5 years because they're going to be too large to be between the houses. So that really just, it's really counter to what we're trying to do. So I'm just saying, let's look at it with more reason than a tree for a tree. That doesn't always make sense, and it's not always safe.
I like Gary, because if I could have another question. Gary, you're very involved in issues regarding how to keep our town as nice as it possibly can, and the role that trees play in helping with water not running over the streets on alternative route 1 in an area, because people that say, I love Dewey, I want to be there. So they buy a house where you bought, but you want to also have a bigger house because it's not big enough for you. So they take down the trees. And what would I know you're not an expert, but at least you're on the environmental kind of committee at looking at these kind of things. What role in the Pine area play in the area of alternative route 1 play in helping with water issues when there's a lot of rain?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that, Elaine. I'm not, the arborist is certainly in a much better position to address a question like that. But I mean, clearly it's, plantings and tree canopy, preserving the character of the neighborhoods that we have in Dewey Beach has been a part of the discussion with respect to this tree ordinance, as it has been with other things. We've got at least one other ordinance where we've talked about stormwater runoff and the kind of drainage systems that homeowners need to maintain. So there's clearly concern about that. The discussion that we've had about this particular one has really focused around preserving the kind of the character of the neighborhood, to the extent that there's a tree canopy there, preserving that tree canopy. And what the code requires right now, and what we enacted probably 2 years ago, I think, was as Marcia suggested, it's basically if you take a tree out, you have to replace the tree. If it's a dead tree, you don't have to replace it. That's not an issue. Or if it's a tree that poses a safety hazard, and the arborist can come in and certify the fact that that tree does present a safety hazard. There's no problem with taking that out either, and that tree does not have to be replaced. If you're looking at a property and it has a lot of trees on it, my views thus far, which certainly can evolve and change based on how people feel about it, is that the fact that there are trees on that property is a characteristic of the property. And if you know up front that if you're going to build a house there, and there are a number of trees in the potential building footprint, it's something you have to deal with. You have to make some adjustments. You have to come up with a plan that would satisfy the code and the intent of the code to replace trees that are taken out. If they're small trees, if they're trees below a certain size, 20 inches or greater or less rather in circumference, you can remove those trees. You don't have to have a permit to do that. You don't have to. There's no requirement to replace them. If they're very large trees, and they're not in the building footprint, you can't get a permit to take those down. If they're less than 40 inches, you can get a permit. If it's not in the building footprint, if it's in the building footprint, you can get a permit to do that. No one has said, and there's nothing in the code requires that you have to, in terms of a replacement tree, you have to use an oak tree or something that's going to grow to 40 or 50 feet tall. That's not a requirement here. The only requirement is that your replacement tree has to be of a minimum size. Now we're talking about perhaps reducing it to a diameter of 3 inches, and a minimum of 12 feet tall. But there's no requirement that it be an oak tree. It just has to be a native species, something that's listed on the Delaware Department of Agricultural list of acceptable trees, or another authoritative list. And I think DNREC may have a list. I'm not sure. I'm not sure exactly what the town is providing, but I'm presuming that's an authoritative list. But again, there are trees, and as Marcia suggested, she's planted a number of trees on her property. It doesn't have to be an oak tree. It can be if you're talking about planting something in an 8-foot setback, it could be a crepe myrtle. There's no reason why we have to talk about replacing trees or putting in trees that are going to present a safety hazard over time.
And I will turn it over, is that what I worry about is that I'm a 65-year-old woman who have come to Dewey for a long time, and I read the newspaper. I haven't seen like the hazard that you're talking about, Marcia, about a tree falling over, because they've been there for a long time. And when you do have the new kind of like people coming in and deciding to build on the Forgotten Mile, that area, and they start taking trees down because they do want to have a bigger house, I'm not sure that we really understand the impact that will have on the whole area. So crepe myrtles are not sucking up a great deal of water like some of those old pine trees. Those pine trees over there, I'm not a lover of those, but at the same token, they've been, sucking up a lot of water when there's rain. And so when you go beyond thinking about the aesthetics, you think about the long term of the community. And you have to figure out what kind of trees will actually work. You don't have to do, as you say, Marcia, having to replace something if they go, on their setback and they want to build something on their setback. But how are they going to put trees back that are going to deal with any kind of issues with flooding? Because I think that we probably don't know how well Mother Nature has taken care of that area in on Route 1. and pines that have actually helped our area to not be flooded. And so, because those trees do have a great role. And they also obviously work as far as environmentally, because again, I haven't seen, as I've seen in Washington and other places where these trees, the land gets so soaked, they fall over and they crash into the roofs. But I think the discussion of like what kind of trees and how many trees and how those need to be, I think it's a bigger discussion besides the ball of how big the tree is in between, because we have this particular charter thing. If we want to really just retain the beauty as well as the water safety issue that Mother Nature has dealt with for us, I don't know. That's all I have to say is that.
Okay.
I'll let you go now, and I'll go.
Thanks, Lane. I want to give Diane a chance to chime in here.
Yeah, I was just looking at the definition of hardwoods, and it mentions oaks and maples and ash, and it seems like a 3-inch diameter is really small. So I guess I would ask our arborist, like, what are examples of hardwoods that would meet the 3-inch diameter?
Well, I mean, you can get any tree in that caliber, you know, it's but more like what Marcia is talking about. It's more about what that tree's capable of becoming.
Yes.
Right? And a couple of things that have occurred to me as we progressed and listened to what's going on. You know, the one other thing that we haven't talked about is trees that aren't being removed on the lot while construction is going on. I believe we should have a protection plan for those trees that are remaining on the lot, so that 2 years after the house is built, we're not losing those trees as well because they're dying, right? You know, like I said earlier, because of the soil conditions here in Delaware, that whole tree of life symmetry of the drip line of the canopy meeting the root line and it being a continuous tree of cycle of life is kind of off the charts here in Sussex County, Delaware. I mean, they have traced a tree root 1.5 miles from a tree here in Sussex County, Delaware. So because the roots don't tap down, they spread more. And in the setback, limited setbacks that we're talking about, those trees that are 4 feet from the foundation, those roots won't penetrate the foundation, but roots will hit the concrete and then they'll run one way or the other down the concrete. And when the actual trunk of the tree is so close, those buttress roots, as that tree matures, will put pressure on that foundation. You need more than that 4 feet. And what the L. Lane was talking about is true. The tree roots, you know, just to use DNREC for an example, you know, wetlands and all that, they'll allow you to take trees out, but they won't allow you to disturb the ground and the roots because of the runoff. And I mean, there's evidence now to support, if you're aware of what's going on just in our county, of what the runoff is doing from these big developments that are getting put in, what that's doing already to our bay and to the estuaries that we have. So
Sediment control.
storm runoff is a real thing. And all tree roots are capable of absorbing water. Obviously, crepe myrtle obviously isn't going to have as extensive, typically, of a root system as another tree might. There are smaller hardwood trees. A hornbeam is a perfect example of a tree that will grow to 25, 30 feet. Is designed to be more in a city landscape with a branching structure that's at a 45-degree angle or more, which allows for it to fit in a tighter space.
So there are options that we
There
can
are.
say. There are options that when,
Yeah.
so I'm gonna say, if we were to submit, when we submit a building plan, and we say to somebody, the town says, you've got to give us a plan for planting trees. And if we were to say like, in the setbacks, we'll work with you to determine trees that are appropriate for the setbacks and the size of setbacks, but still allow us to maintain the coverage or some amount of green space in the town. That's what I'm hearing, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. Diane, any questions? Dan, more?
No, that was all.
Okay.
I have two things real quick. We should have, if we don't already, in the excavation, clearing and grubbing permit, tree protection of existing
Okay.
trees. We should. If it's snow fence with 2x4s, maybe we should refeed it during construction. I've always protected trees on.
And there are, you know,
It's a
just
simple,
for
cheap
example,
thing,
with
yeah.
the city of Rehoboth now,
Yeah.
you know, if you are taking trees down and a new house is being built or whatever, you are not only responsible for a protection plan for the trees that are remaining on that property, but those that exist outside of that property as well, because we know that those roots are traveling in. And you know, taking a tree with a 20-inch circumference or diameter, either one even, and just putting a canvastat thing 2 feet off of each edge of the trunk is not going to really do anything.
It should be
right?
required on the permit for clearing and
Yeah.
grubbing.
Yeah.
Water runoff, it's not just trees absorbing the water, it's the permeable soils.
Right, which we don't have.
We don't have permeable
Floor,
soil, so it's
but-
not, you're gonna have runoff in an area geographically like this also. And maybe we should reduce the menu of trees that people can choose from and limit them within, you know, the distance from a building, you can only go with this type of tree and so forth and so on.
I mean, I know it's hard to say we treat each situation differently.
Well, it's under plan
Because
review.
you have to have kind of a uniform policy. But I do believe that there is room for, you know, with each thing, I don't know if we allow people to build houses to like the setback or like, you know, in limit, or if we try to maintain more of usable property on a 50 by 100 lot, or we're able to, I don't know what.
I'll give you the answer to that. They build to the setbacks. Generally, they build right to the setback.
Okay.
That is generally the practice that goes on.
But during plan review yourself, wouldn't you review the building permit, site plan, landscaping plan to and back check to see that tree's too big?
So David, it would happen, the town would do it as
Yeah.
part of the permit process,
So
right?
we do it, we ask, like, when you put in a permit to build your home,
Yes.
we also ask for a landscaping plan. That landscaping plan has to be approved. What we're finding is when the people are building to the setbacks, now all of a sudden they're like, we don't want to put these trees in these locations. For example, the picture that Marcia showed, putting those trees in there, and they were squeezed in there. Jim and I asked probably a year or so ago if we could have some leeway from the commissioners on certain building lots to maybe have some judgment on it and say, okay, instead of 5, you could put 4 trees in. And the commissioners said no.
Okay.
I think the other thing we're talking about actually is contradictive, because we're talking about preserving the canopy. The canopy requires 30 to 40, 50, 60-foot trees. And we're saying at the same time, yeah, we don't have to preserve the canopy because we know our setbacks, when you build to the setback, will only allow you to build a tree, put in a tree that's going to be decorative with a 45-degree angle for a cityscape. So we have to realize that there is some extent where we cannot preserve the canopy because we don't have the space to put a tree that will grow to a canopy size. And I think Steve has said in our best setback, we have 18 feet. That's not a safe distance from the house for a 60-foot or a 40-foot tree. So it's counter to preserving the canopy to say, well, we can have smaller trees, 20 feet. Either we're preserving the canopy and we're going to say, as a property owner, for me, the tree we covet in the north end is the loblolly. Whether you like it or not, it is on, 80% of the trees in our north end. So the only place, if you're building to the setbacks, that you can put a loblolly in is your front yard.
But that's not what the code says, though. That's not what the code says.
No, I'm saying, I would encourage us to say, practically and reasonably, if our effort is to preserve the 30, 40, 60-foot canopy, then you should be required to put a loblolly, which is native and the signature tree of the north end. If you're taking out 8 trees and you're planting 8 crepe myrtles, you're not preserving the canopy. So now we're going to overcrowding because we're going to require 8 trees in the front yard. Those roots are going to get intertrangled. They're going to fight for the sun. They're going to fight for water, and they're either going to die or they're going to have to be removed.
Okay, I'm gonna stop this. I want to get, Jim, if you have any comments?
Most of my comments have been addressed. I got a little education on trees, I appreciate it. I had a question about the 2 trees, the town, those trees will have to come down in 4 or 5 years.
Those trees, yeah, and those were the examples that Jim and I used, and one of the reasons we came back to the commissioners and
It
kind
seems
of
like that would be
said
not
that-
reasonable.
Yeah, and to try to squeeze those trees in there. Jim was up there with the landscaping company when they were trying to squeeze those trees in, and then, it was a real problem getting those trees into that space. But you have to remember, they turned in a landscaping plan, and in their landscaping plan that was approved by the town, they said they would put trees in those locations. So,
It didn't change, just that's
We
where
run
they were.
into that periodically, and I was involved in that planting of the trees. When I talked to the arborist, they had selected, and it escapes me what kind of a tree. They said this is not the type of tree that roots immediately spread out. It's going to be tight, but they're not a typical oak tree root system, and they only go about 25, 30 feet. They're not going to go 50, 60 feet. So, but again, that's a landscape we follow. They give it to us. We tell them we'll approve it. They don't have. They can select different trees. The bigger issue was a 5-inch a 5-inch caliper. That was the issue. And I think when we had a discussion among ourselves, we were saying we might want to consider a smaller canopy. They have a wide selection of trees that they can pick from. If they pick an oak, they pick an oak. I mean, we can't. Then that's a problem. But we do think that taking out potentially 8 or 9 trees and replacing 8 or 9 trees may not be the best way to handle that. To allow trees to grow properly and healthy and not die in 4 or 5 years. So I think we were asking for reducing it to a 3-inch and maybe look at the number of trees. And look, and on the other hand, we're dealing with a property owner that gave us a landscape plan, does not want to follow the tree requirement, and we're holding this lady to it. We don't have a way. If you want to take it, we've talked to our town solicitor, and we suggested take it to the Board of Adjustment, even though they exceeded the time frame of when you can appeal a decision. But we'll see what happens.
So if there's, I kind of want to see if we can get us, because we've been at this for almost an hour. So I want to get us to some consensus about what we as a group want to recommend. So I'm going to summarize a couple of things here, and let's see if I can get enough to make a recommendation. Maybe we can make on some, and maybe we need to come back to it. I don't know. But is there one topic we've talked about is reducing the size of the ball. So changing our code to be a minimum diameter of 3 inches measured 1 foot above the ground. So let's cover that. Is the group in favor of that?
Are you taking a vote?
So I'm just saying, okay, let me do it this way. I'm going to close, let me do this. I'm going to close the public meeting, and now I'm going to put together one thing at a time and just ask for a vote. Let's do it that way, okay? So the first item I'm going to ask for a first, second, and an approval. So the first thing I'm going to ask is, can we as a group make a recommendation to change the minimum diameter measured 1 foot above the ground to 3 inches? So is there a first on that?
I'll first on that.
I'll second.
Okay. And I'm going to just, let's try it. Is everyone all in favor of that, or do you want me to do an individual roll call?
I'm in favor.
Jimmy's in favor? Diane?
Yes.
David?
Yes.
Marcia, you said yes?
Yeah.
Marcia? And Elaine? Elaine, are you in favor of that?
I'm not sure, but I'll say yes.
All right, so there's one we've agreed on. The next one I want to suggest is, should we recommend the introduction of tree pits to be a requirement? So I'm gonna take David's lead on that and say, if you got something that came up,
Are you, I'm sorry, I don't have my hearing aids in, pits, P-I-T-S?
Yes.
Where they actually go down deeper into the ground?
Well, they put a structure
Uh-huh.
in the ground, put the soil and the ball in the ground, backfill it, and,
Yeah, I mean, you could go as simple as a root barrier that would be 18 to 24 inches of metal that would go in that would.
does it do the
go
same job
that
as a
way.
pit?
What's that?
Does it do the same job as a pit?
Yeah, I haven't seen, I've seen a few pits because more so when I see a pit tree, it's because they've raised the elevation of the ground around those trees and you can't put dirt up the trunk of a tree. So I've never seen tree pits actually.
I see them in the public areas a lot, in the cities,
Okay,
in the sidewalks, in the common area sidewalks to restrict, and they use precast pits.
Right.
But maybe the root ball works too.
root barrier.
so,
yeah.
so let's, if I were to make the requirement, I mean, we're not gonna come down to specific codes here, but just if we can get an idea, then we can, it'll go to the commissioners, maybe we can.
I think,
fine-tune it.
I'm in favor.
So, yeah, so I'm hearing suggest a root barrier or a pit, whatever's appropriate.
Yeah.
Is that something we should introduce to the code? So I'm gonna ask, we're gonna say that's our recommendation, and I'm gonna ask for a
And
first.
maybe with the caveat at certain locations. You don't want to put a pit maybe in the center of the backyard.
No.
Maybe, depends on where
How
this,
about as required
okay.
to,
If it's next to a house, like Marcia
right.
mentioned, maybe you want a pit there
As
to
re-
restrict the expansion
to
of
restrict-
the roots.
right, okay, so we can do that. So suggest a root barrier or a pit as required to
Yeah.
protect the foundation
Yeah.
of the building. Okay? Can I get it first?
I'll make a first.
Great. And a second?
I'll second it.
Thanks, Jimmy. I'm gonna go around and vote. Marcia, in favor, yes or no?
Just no, because I think we don't have enough data or research on what the requirements and how they would meet our soil and growth. So I just like, if it moves forward, I'd just like to see more data on it relative to our soil and our topography.
Okay. Elaine?
I agree with Marcia.
Of course.
Okay.
Somebody said,
I'm gonna, Jimmy? Do you favor the recommendation?
I second it, so yes.
Okay. David?
Yes.
And Diane?
Yes.
Okay. I'm also gonna support that one.
How do we determine what requirement,
You mean for,
which
the
trees
pit?
get it and which trees don't?
so what we've just kind of, as Agree said, is suggested as required to protect the foundation. So what I would think, I'll
public.
get the reservation, but I would want to go back to Jim and Dawn and just say, look, is it fair for you to, when somebody comes in and say, you would recommend this, or this would be a suggestion? I guess a homeowner could refuse to do it.
Public area as
The,
well.
can
So if
can I
somebody
make
puts
a
it in the front
friendly,
yard, you don't get tree roots.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand that. That was what I was voting on. Didn't-
So
yeah.
the question that came out is, what's the right determination for a root barrier? Is it within this premise to proximity to a house? Do we need that root barrier if it's in the front of the house because there's plenty of room? So the suggestion we had is that we would, as required, and my suggestion would be, as part of the landscaping process, that the town would work with the homeowner to decide whether or not that's appropriate. So Jim, do you have a comment on that?
I did personally, and I was just wondering whether we should include an arborist to look at this. To see if it really makes, the real concern I have is if you can find a root ball, those roots are just gonna go in circles and circles until, and a tree may not survive. I don't know enough about it, but I've had some practice in my home where roots, because they can't go into the soil, they go in circles. And it might cause problems, but I would think if you're gonna go that route, an arborist needs to take a look at it and make a determination.
And Jim, would that be appropriate at the time of the plan being submitted?
I think what we would say, it would be determined at the time, or depending on the tree and when they're doing it. So that would have to come in after the fact.
Each species would have a different requirement for that. There is some truth to what he's saying about roots girdling a tree. And so you do want to have sufficient space, but it still, once again, controls the roots from going into the neighbor's yard, and I do believe, I would have to do some fact checking on this. I do believe that it inhibits the roots to try to grow down, more. And there is also the ability, when trees are planted, to dig 2 feet of clay out and put proper soil in that's going to allow those tree roots to better develop.
So I'm
You're
not,
gonna backfill the pit with real good soil.
Right.
Yeah. You're gonna excavate the hole of clay and mush to put the pit in or barrier in, and you're gonna backfill that with
Good dirt.
good dirt.
but I guess I'm trying to get us to something to agree on here.
Right.
So if we've got, I mean, we could go round and round about
I understand.
and what's there. So if we can't,
Okay.
I'm hearing that a root barrier, I've got enough yeses here to suggest a root barrier as required to protect the foundation with input from the arborist to be documented at the time of the
Plan approval.
plan approval. Okay? All right. The other guess I would have is, I don't know what the answer is on this, so I don't know what the recommendation should be. To limit the number of trees. And I'll tell you on this, without a metric, I'm not going to support this myself. So I don't know what the right what the right answer is here. Because if I follow the logic that's been discussed here, I would strip the lot. A 50 by 100 lot, there's basically no room to plant a tree. If you go with the argument that it's got to be at least 30 feet from the house. So you might as well just level the lot. Let's take the whole north end and just level it. That's basically what you're saying. So I absolutely reject it.
No. I don't believe that at all, David. I think what was discussed is that there is an issue of like, it's, the done deed was the setback and how much people can build on a property. The new thing is that when they do buy a property, is that they have to understand what the love and the need, not just for canopy, but for water issues are dealt with. So I don't think that we should think to ourselves okay, no. We have to look at this and figure out, I think, a lot closer, because the long-term goal is that you don't want to have that area, the pines. We have all those trees that are quite annoying, in my opinion, because they have they're quite annoying because of all the pines that are coming down, and they're obviously a fire issue, but they haven't come down. We have to figure out a way that people that are buying into, new owners that are buying in, to recognize that those big trees in the pine area have probably soaken up a lot of water and dealt with issues. So they have these beautiful houses. So I don't think that it's I just don't think this is a done conversation. I think that immediate conversation is that to create myrtles in between the house when you have a setback of 8 feet, and you're worried about what's going to happen to your foundation. I think we have a bigger issue about dealing with the future of that end, and I don't know. I'm just a little bit concerned that everybody's going, okay, well, we don't want to have those big bulbs, that when they take down the tree. I think we have to have a bigger we have to have a longer look at this. And it's not going to be helpful to Jim, and it's not going to be helpful to, the town. But we do, for the long term, we have to look about like how we're taking care of this town. And that's, so anyway, that's my little thing. Because I don't think that what we're seeing is people want to come in and they want to buy real estate and they want to figure out how much they can monetize it. And if we want to like even help those people, we have to figure out a better way to have the drainage that we need to have that those trees and the pines have offered. So I don't know, maybe it's not maybe we can't change the charter and code today, but we have to think forward about issues, about drainage and what those trees did. And every time you take one down in one house, what is that going to mean? That's my sermon.
Okay. I don't have a magic answer here for what's the right number of trees to be replaced or not. So I don't have anything to offer on what the recommendation is. So if somebody else wants to present something, we can vote on it, but I don't have anything.
Could I recommend that, I think what we've heard from the town, that they want some leeway in making some practical / reasonable choices based on the lot, the construction of the house and the setbacks and the trees required, and whether the house had to remove 10 trees or 2 trees. And I think the town has kind of been crying out for some, variance in just doing this. And I'm just going to suggest, if we want to move forward, and that seems to be the problem, that maybe we ask the town to have some leeway or some just common sense application of deviating from that, given the conditions. I also want to say that the roof pits, from what I'm seeing, there are several types. There's a certain particular design in planning them. There are roof trips with rib barriers, but most of them are only for urban environments, meaning you're planting a tree where there's concrete all around it, cities, roads, everything. They're not generally supported in areas where you want root growth. So I think to recommend something that we just brought up today and we don't know anything about, and there seems to be like 5 different types of root pits and different varying lengths and how you protect them.
But Marcia, I want to interrupt you. The group already voted to go ahead and move through with that, so I don't want to revisit it. It's a recommendation. The commissioners can do something with it or not. But we as a group said we should allow.
David, are you, excuse me, with all due respect, when I have something to add, is there a reason why I'm the one you cut off?
No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying you're going back and we have already agreed on this. And I'm trying to get us at least to this idea of your idea that you presented, which I think is the next thing we should discuss, which is to provide town officials some discretion. So we should recommend to the commissioners that the town Jim, Don, be allowed some discretion to use their judgment in how many trees should be replaced on a lot. That's the thing I'm trying to
I
get.
was just suggesting that we add to the recommendation that we explore the parameters around these root pits, because there are 5 different varying types. And
So-
we seem to jump into codes that we have to go back and revisit because we don't do enough research.
So all I'm doing here is saying, suggest a root barrier / pit as required to protect the foundation with an arborist input at land approval. So that doesn't necessarily mean we're requiring it. So I don't know. That's my suggestion.
I just want us to put the best code forward that we don't have to come back and revisit. And I think if we're all taking our time to be here to do that, it's important that everybody adds to it.
But what we did is we had a comment. We voted on it. So I'm not going to go back and open it up again for a vote.
Then let's just vote on what you have there, and we should have no further discussion.
We did vote on that item.
Perfect.
So now the recommendation we've got is to provide town officials some discretion to be able to replace a tree, to make a recommendation that we give town officials some flexibility to use their judgment when it comes to replacing a tree on a lot.
As
So,
far as the number,
as the number.
So let me ask, I'm buying a house in Dewey, and I have to go to you first to see if I could take a tree down before I buy that lot? I mean, you have to do homework,
So
obviously.
if it's in the footprint of where you want to build your house, and Jim or Dawn can answer this question, but yeah, you have to get permission to take down the trees on that lot before you build.
The way
Before you buy,
Jimmy, the way the code reads is if you want to plant a tree on your lot, you didn't take down a tree, we don't have a code that says you have to do that.
oh, wait, no, I'm just saying, if it's a question whether or not I'm gonna buy a lot that has trees on it, and I want to take one down, I have to ask you probably before I buy that lot.
You should ask us, how many trees, if I take down these trees, how many of them do I have to replace? And you may not buy the lot based on that.
Well, okay.
Yeah.
I feel like we're gonna make your job harder, Jim.
Well,
I mean, I feel like we're gonna make your job harder, that's all.
well, it always starts off with, you have a lot, an empty lot, and it's always the empty lots with trees. And then somebody comes in and they design a footprint. They're going to build a house. They tell us what they're going to build, and they're going to take out 9 trees, let's say, which is not unusual in some of the older lots that were around. Then we're going to say is, okay, show us the landscaping plan where you're going to put these trees.
Right.
So the property owner knows up front. And we've got something right now where we've got a tree that's got to be at least 100 years old on a lot, and it's got to have the canopy's got to be at least 60, 75 feet in width, if not more. And we've had a lot of realtors ask us, what do we do with that? And we tell them, it is what it is. And somebody said that it may be in the deed, the recorded deed, that it can't be taken down. But that's an issue. And, it's a healthy tree. There's no question it is healthy. So that's some of the issues the property owner is going to have to look at and decide, do I really want to get into this before I buy the property?
Right, okay, that's kind of my question.
Guys, thank you.
Yes.
I didn't know it was going to be this late. Is it okay if I?
Yeah,
excuse
absolutely, sir.
myself?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
You're welcome.
So I just come back, a recommendation to provide town officials some discretion, that we want to recommend that to the commissioners. So is there a first for that?
I'll make a first.
Are you saying discretion on the number of trees?
Yes. Well,
Or just general discretion?
what's the group want? What is the group want? General discretion, or do we want to say the number of trees?
Well, is the biggest issue the number?
Biggest
Or-
issue is the number and the size of the trees. It must go back on the lot by the town code. Jim, and the number of trees and the size.
Yes.
It's just hard to do it if you build to the max on the lot.
So we make a recommendation that we reduce the size. Do we want to just focus on the number of trees? Is that acceptable to the group? It's your recommendation, so is that acceptable? Is that what we want to vote on?
Isn't that when we sent them 2 years ago, and the commissioners turned it down? Okay.
We can go back and say, recommend it again.
Worse then.
Well, they could,
Do it again. So, can I get a first?
I'll make a first.
Second?
Second.
Thank you. Let's go ahead and vote. Jimmy?
I'm gonna pass.
Okay. Marcia?
Yes.
Elaine?
Would pass.
Diane?
Yes.
David?
Yes.
And I'm also going to vote yes. Although I will say this, I think we're putting an undue burden, and I don't know how you're going to make this number work, but
It's impossible.
if that's what you guys are asking for, I'm willing to support you, because it's your job every day. So,
But we did do this 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Okay. It's.
okay. So with that, is there any other recommendation anybody wants to suggest regarding the trees? So we have,
Revisit the Delaware standards of how many trees to choose from? Should we revisit that? Shrink it down to Dewey? I mean, we're not building upstate Delaware. So a lot of these trees that are on this big list don't pertain to maybe what's good here in Dewey.
so I guess the question would be, if you submit the plan.
Make his
and it's-
job easier too.
Well, so what would that be? So if we go to the commissioners, we have to have a suggestion with what.
So you'd have to go through the whole list and pick
We
the
have to go
trees
through the
out.
trees list.
Yeah, with the help of an arborist. What's good here in Dewey based on soil, based on, but,
Maybe Sussex County,
or,
not all.
The arborists we've talked to have already recommended, they look at it and they come up with recommendations. There's a lot of trees.
That's the point. Maybe we shrink it down to what's good here within Dewey.
Uh.
Not what's up in
Well,
Dover or something.
we'd have to have arborists tell us that. We're not qualified.
Yeah, but maybe the arborist does a little homework and revises the list that good trees here for Dewey.
I think we would have to pay for arborists to do that for us. And to go that way. I don't know that, I mean, that's a recommendation. I don't want to say no, but,
Arborist is gonna look at the proposal, right? And he'll say, this is not a good tree for here, I would think. Like, you would think
Well,
that.
who looks at the plan for you? Does an arborist look at it?
Yeah, so.
Or a building department guy?
So Jim, you want to answer that one?
what we do is we have a landscaping plan that is given to us by a landscaper.
Right.
Now, we don't always say we want an arborist to verify it. It's not a requirement. What it is a requirement is when it gets down to the plan and we say, you've put this into the plan and in your survey, now you got to live with it. And that's when the arborist kicks in, and sometimes they say it's impossible. But right now we don't care because our code really says you got to meet a certain requirement. Pick a tree with a 5-inch caliper. It's your choice. Figure it out.
Are we gonna try to wrap up this new size into one little new code? And maybe the arborist is a stamp when the electrician stamps the drawings and the plumber stamps the drawings.
I guess you could do that. I think part of it is when you do a landscaping plan, you do a construction, let's say you'd go 8 feet on both sides. That's where your foundation is going to be, right? You're going to dig out probably another 2 or 3 feet, 5 feet. You're going to be 3 feet more into the setback just to be able to lay block, do whatever you do, pour cement. When it's finished, that's when the arborist comes in and says, this is what I think will fit here or not. But, we can have look, it's up to the commissioners to make a decision as to what you want us to hold up and enforce.
So I'll come back. Does that provide any clarity in terms of, these are recommendations, you just want to go ahead and suggest that I don't know who's going to do this, but who would reduce the number of trees? What is the list?
Yeah, it sounds like it might be rather subjective.
Yeah, but an arborist who's an expert in trees.
But what are you saying? So that would say, you want an arborist to go, I'm just asking, so we're going to have an arborist go through once and make a recommendation?
It's one
Have
review
cut the
of the list of how many trees in the state of Delaware. It's a couple hours or whatever it is. It's a one-shot deal. That list is part of the building criteria here.
Instead of anything that's a native tree, you're suggesting we simplify the list with the input of an arborist?
Yeah.
Okay? We can put that together.
Okay.
So we want to suggest that we have an arborist review the native species list.
Yeah, handbook or whatever it's called.
Yeah, I think it's native species list, and suggest
What's good for Dewey.
what is appropriate for Dewey Beach.
I think we're going to need a couple of I wouldn't trust one arborist. I think we need more than one.
Okay.
Because we have discrepancies between arborists of what they can do and what they can't do.
Or maybe these big landscaping contractors we're using in the city might just do it for us.
They might, I don't know.
Might have to pay anything.
Yeah, let's go through with the recommendation. I think it's a
Okay.
fair recommendation. I
Okay.
think it's a good one to go ahead. So let's go ahead and can I get a first for the recommendation?
First.
Okay. Second? Thanks, Jimmy. Let's go ahead and vote. Marcia?
Yes.
Elaine?
Yeah,
Jimmy?
Yes.
Diane?
Yes.
Yes.
And David?
Yes.
And I will also vote in favor of yes. Okay? Is there any other point, any other recommendation anybody else wants to bring up at this time for this tree topic? Okay, with that, I'm going to close this discussion on agenda item 1. And let's see if we can cover agenda item 2. Maybe we'll put the other off. So So the next agenda item is to discuss amendments to chapter 185-46 of the code regarding the building height regulations. The committee may vote on recommendations to the town council. So I'm going to give you just a quick, and I'm going to turn to Jim and ask him for his, because he's got a lot of background on this specific code. So if you take a look at 185-46, 185-46 pertains to buildings that were built pre-flood maps. So when the town was established in, and I think it's 1983, I'll say 19, it's close. The town went by county height standards. And I think they were much higher. I don't know if they were 40 feet, 42 feet, whatever, so they were higher, right? 42 feet. When the town was incorporated in, I think, 82, 83,
82, yeah.
the town standard, the height standard became 35 feet. Was it 35 feet downtown too, Jim, or just
35 feet was for everything.
for everything? Okay. So that was the height standard. I don't remember it because at one point it was reduced to 32 feet downtown and still the north end is 35 feet. But when the flood maps, okay, when FEMA came in and created the flood maps, the flood ordinance, which is 101, chapter 101, specifically calls out, and it's, do you have that? I can show it. It's, never mind. It's 101 says, in no case will a building exceed the height standard. So remember, when a building is substantially damaged, I should say this code refers to a substantially damaged home. So basically grandfather, if you want, I know that's the word I'm going to use, grandfather, that it would normally be, the question is, since we now changed the freeboard and a house now has to be built, base elevation plus 2, perhaps 3 feet, and the way the code is written now is there's a gap. The flood ordinance says it can't be taller than the height standard, and chapter 185-46 says it can be rebuilt to its original height. So there's a conflict. Okay, that's what we're trying to get to.
Because of the freeboard calculation.
No, it's a conflict the way it's written now.
Right.
Because, and it's
The
further
revised
exacerbated.
freeboard number is,
We've gone up, so
Right.
now we further exacerbated the problem.
Right.
So, Jim, you want to provide any more background that I covered? Is there something else? that you'd like
You
to add?
covered it. Let me just make a couple of comments. When base flood elevation was required, and it's only in a flood zone, like in the north side of the town, for the most part, you're not impacted by this. You're governed by a 35 foot from the center point of the street. But if you're in a flood zone, you have to abide by whatever the base flood elevation is, which is done by a survey. It's an elevation certificate that they do, and they go out and measure, and they give us a line, wherever that may be. Sometimes it's above 35. It's 4 or 5 feet above the property, and sometimes it may be flat with the property, depending on where you're located. And that's the starting point of where your home can be constructed. And with that ordinance, it says you can't exceed 32 feet above base flood elevation plus the freeboard. Now, depending on where it is, it can look like it's higher than 35 feet, and a lot of times it looks like it's a smaller home. What we're talking about is homes that were built pre-firm, before we had a flood insurance rate map that came out. And what that basically says is that these homes must meet it's kind of a conflicting situation in the code. Under 10127, it's number 3. And then what basically it says, if your home is substantially damaged, if we go by one section, you can't build it up past the 32 feet. Now, we have a few structures that are above that would never meet that criteria. They wouldn't be able to do it. We have some condos that are 3 stories. They're already 37 to 38 feet above the 35-foot level, and I'm pretty sure that they would not be able to meet the current code. Now, we also have a section in the code that says, unless otherwise provided for in Chapter 185. So this section in 101, there may be a little bit of confusion, and what we were recommending is make it so that it's clear that if you have a non-conforming house and you're above your base flood elevation plus whatever, we're not going to say you got to go to the Board of Adjustment to have it remedied, because we're making an assumption that the Board of Adjustment is going to say, no, you don't have to take down that third floor and the condos are extinct, and it just doesn't make sense. So we're trying to marry it in such a way that the language makes it so if you've got a non-conforming home, and as we call it, I think, Dave, you said they're grandfathered, and I know our town attorney hates that term, but they're legal non-conforming, meaning they're legally where they are, they existed, and that's why, and they can have what they've got. I don't know if that explained it, but that's what the issue is we saw. And
was
maybe
explained well.
Commissioner Persinger might have a better synopsis than I did.
Well, I would only say if you trace the history of how this current situation in the code occurred, I think it was 2014, Planning and Zoning went through a long process of developing the current version of Section 101, which is the flood damage reduction section of the code. And then it was clear in the discussion that both they and the commissioners at that time thought that there could be a disadvantageous situation for people who have homes that were built before the adoption of the flood insurance rate maps. So they thought that if those homeowners in that situation were faced with the prospect of having to rebuild when their home was substantially damaged, and they wanted to rebuild in the same configuration, but yet that would exceed the new height standard of 32 feet above a base flood elevation plus freeboard, that there should be an exception built into the code. So I think it was in May of 2015, the commissioners approved Section 185-46. And I believe it was intended clearly as an exception. And, it's easy to read the code now and say, well, there's a conflict between those two. But I think 185-46 was clearly meant to be an exception. And so the intent of the changes that are suggested here are to make that exception clear and to clear up any notion that this is really a conflict in the code.
Thank you. So I guess I want to start, I'm going to open the public meeting. Is there any comment in the room? There's no one here in the room for any comment. Is there anybody online that has a comment? Okay.
What about the bottom right chat? Is that for us?
If you're in there, if you're online, you can
Yeah,
chat.
is that any questions that people have?
Kate usually monitors it, so she doesn't
Okay.
have anything. So I guess the first question I'm going to ask the group, and I'll go around, I'll throw this out there and let's kind of discuss this, and then, so is there any sentiment in the room that says we shouldn't continue to support legally non-conforming homes, AKA grandfather, to allow them, if they're substantially damaged, to rebuild to their original height? So I guess that's the first question I want to get out there, because if there's a sentiment that we don't think that's right, I will say, I think if you have a non-conforming house in terms of setbacks, that those are grandfathered. So what we're doing now is we're talking about the height of a building, and we're saying if you were built before and you're substantially damaged, you basically get to rebuild to the height. So I think I want to make sure everybody is there any discussion in the room about we should take back that,
What is the definition of substantially damaged?
The FEMA code calls it, if anything's over 50% of the structure is damaged. It's the structure, not the property.
Is it the value of the structure, Jim?
Yeah, it's the value of the structure done by a certified appraiser who comes out, not a regular real estate, who's certified with FEMA to make those judgments. So they'll come out and look at the structure, and let's say the structure's $500,000 that they certified that's what it is. The damage done is $260,000. That's substantially damaged. Anything over half the price.
Can I clarify?
So but if the roof is still on it, and we're blowing out windows and the storm goes through the building, but the roof is still there, they're gonna still build back and not affect the height of the roof, right?
They can replace the roof if it's over the.
Yeah, but they can't.
If it's
No.
under the 50% value, they don't have to do anything. We're fine. They can replace it.
Right, if it's greater, they have the right to rebuild it. And it's a flood zone, they now need to, and it's more than 50% damage, they now have to comply with the flood standard. I think I've got that right, Jim. They've got to comply with the feds if it's.
Yes, they do. They have to meet the flood.
Which by reducing the height?
No, so that's what we're saying. This is all about not reducing the height.
We're gonna let them
Right.
continue.
No, there's a lot of stuff. They may have to raise the foundation. They may have to put flood vents in. They may have to recertify all of the electrical that goes underneath. There's a lot to it, and it's an expensive proposition for them if they reach that. And we feel that we don't want to say you can't go back to the original height.
No, I agree.
Right? That's what it's
I
like,
don't know if you mind me just visualizing this for you, is that, I totally agree with this, by the way, but what Jim is really talking about is that the future of Dewey, if there was a catastrophic situation where a lot of places were ruined, we have in our code right now about the height. And that, what is it, 34? 34?
32 feet base flood elevation plus freeboard.
So what we're talking about is that it would be a different look in Dewey if there was a catastrophic situation, unless we keep those trees. Just kidding. But what we're talking about is that you have the ability to build when what do you call it, David? The bottom.
BFE, base flood elevation.
Yeah. And so it's like where the wood part is, where it's risen up, raised up. So it's all it is like saying people that are going to possibly rebuild their lots, they have the ability to do that because we already know from, I think, a lot of places that, that's not a bad thing to do, right? Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, it's actually, so because if you're in a flood, because the town participates in the National Flood Insurance Program, we would be required. So if it's substantially damaged, it would be required to rebuild and comply with the base flood elevation, the freeboard standard. And what we're saying now is if it was 35 feet before, now you can build back 35 feet.
Right.
The height of the building, not the elevation, because if it will be higher, if you think about elevation, it will now tower higher,
Right.
Yeah.
right? And that's kind of what the whole discussion about freeboard was when we reviewed it.
So is it floodplain and non-floodplain?
Yeah,
It's
so
two
if-
different.
Right, there's two. So if you look at, there's a map
Yeah.
that has specific areas that
Right.
have.
Right.
that are
From
known.
Houston Street to Collins Street, you're in a
Right.
100-year floodplain.
Right.
Suppose your house is on the beach at the dune.
Surprising enough, a lot of the homes, let's say we've got homes in the north side of town. They're right on the beach. They're above the floodplain.
They're actually forward of the dune line,
Yeah.
the correct dune line, because they're
Yeah, so-
legal non-conforming.
Right.
And they're referred to as the next zone, which the majority of the north beach, north side of the town is. Where we run into it, first of all, they're not that there's probably maybe a handful of properties that are way above this anyway that have built, and it's usually condos and maybe the hotel. And we already have one hotel that is 42 point some feet high. 45.2 feet high, and that was part of a lawsuit that was handled. So all of those homes that are in the floodplain, we're just making it clear that our position, that 185 mirrors what we expect and what the intent of the exception was. And Gary, I think, said it very well, that I think the expectation was that 185 section in the zoning code in table 2 needs to be modified to clean it up.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree.
Okay.
Paul.
Any other comments or questions?
You want to summarize? And
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and summarize it. So basically, the change that we would recommend would be modification of Table 2. So Table 2 contains the height standards by region. I'll pass it around to you. And there is a topic here called exclusions to height restrictions. And so we would just insert, C-185-46 modification of height regulations for a substantially damaged pre-firm property in any special flood hazard area. And that also applies to Cheney. So what we're doing is pointing back
Yeah.
we're pointing back to saying, in terms of height, you can go back to 185.46, and 185.46 allows you to rebuild to the height. The only thing we also were suggesting we add is that to qualify for the exclusion, the owner must supply proof via site survey, original building plans, or other appropriate support documenting the height of the undamaged structure.
Right.
It was just saying you have to prove it.
Yeah.
It was,
Suppose the
Legally
FEMA
non-conforming.
appraiser is different than your insurance company appraisal.
Yes.
That value, is not half.
then they, were you saying that if it's
FEMA
not?
says it's $500,000 and State Farm says, because insurance adjusters are notorious for lowball and stuff.
Yeah, the FEMA won't allow that. They won't accept it from a regular real estate appraiser. They want somebody who's certified and is licensed, I guess, is licensed by FEMA. We've run into that in the
But it's all human interpretations. If Joe Smith comes out there, regardless if he's an independent or works for whoever, a title company, suppose his number is doesn't.
No, they work for FEMA.
It can be challenged. It can be
They work for
challenged.
FEMA. They're getting their own adjusters out. Yes?
It's a
Look,
two separate number.
But
So,
but
I
this
guess-
is not really about that. What it's about is that a town code that allows people to, because we had for such a long time, I mean, Marshall will laugh about this, about the 34% like height, right? And Gary and everybody else. It's about the fact that you give the opportunity to people, especially down going towards Ocean City, when they rebuild their house, they can do it under the restrictions of insurance, because we're going to be flooded on the other end of town, bigger than you are on the upper end of town. So this has nothing to do with anything except like protecting those owners, and I'm all for it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Allow them to keep their non-conformity.
Yeah, basically, right, you can continue, they can rebuild their legally non-conforming structure, there you go.
On top of the BA.
With that. Additional line.
With this line, and also the change in table 2, which is what I read.
Okay.
Okay, that's
I'll
the
make-
recommendation.
I'll make that motion.
Okay,
Second.
all right. Let's go around and vote. Marcia,
Yes.
Elaine,
Yes.
Jimmy,
Yes.
David,
Yes.
Diane,
Yes.
and I'm also going to vote yes. Motion approved, thank you.
That was easy.
Thank you. All right, so let me just, it's okay, we're going to just have a conversation on the next item. So let's move on to agenda item 3, which is discuss the International Property Maintenance Code and how it may be applied to the municipal code. The committee may vote on recommendations to the town. So I'm going to give a little background, and then I'm going to ask Jim to speak up. Dawn Hinks brought to my attention that there's really nothing in the existing code that the town can enforce in terms of maintenance of a home, such as like if they have broken windows, or the grass is uncut, or I'll give
The
you
building's
that.
falling
The
apart.
building's falling
Yeah.
apart, or they have bamboo and they're allowing it to grow into the neighbor's yard. There's nothing in our code that allows the town the ability to enforce it. So Dawn suggested, and she brought to my attention, this International Property Maintenance Code.
I'm
which
sorry,
is the
who's
link.
Dawn?
Dawn Hinks is
The buildings.
town of Fisher, building
inspector.
Building inspector.
Yeah.
She works with Jim.
Thank you.
And so she mentioned this International Property Maintenance Code. So it is very, you have to take a look at it, but it does more than
It's a lot.
just, it's a lot, right? And I have examples from different municipalities, Felton, Newark, I think Kent County, that have adopted portions of the code. They didn't necessarily adopt it all. They took portions that they felt was appropriate to their municipality and incorporated it into the code. So, Jim, I want to ask, do you have any other comments on that?
Well, I chatted with Dawn before I left, actually yesterday and today. I said, do you really understand the IBC code? And she goes, not really. And it's very complex. And for most of us, we're not going to be able to figure it out and apply it. It's a code that deals with so many issues that this is not where we're coming from. And I remember years ago, this came up. And Gary, I don't think you were on the, it came up under a former mayor by the name of Rick Soloway. It came up.
It was
And
Chicago Street.
yeah, it was pretty bad. But Rick presented it, and it was he took a New Jersey plan of how they deal with homes that are deteriorating, falling, and we discussed it from the Planning Commission. We looked at it, and the commissioners just thought it was too evasive for the town to get into that. So it was kind of just put off, and it's been resurrected again. And I think it's probably a little too complex to discuss today, to be honest with you. I think that's an entire agenda for one time to look at that. I mean, we don't want to get into people telling you got to replace your screens, you got to do this. It's something like if you see a house that's bad, you know it's bad. But it's hard to say that they didn't paint it. The screens are falling apart. A couple of windows are broken. The roof's got some leaks in it. It can get pretty evasive. And I think we need, I think I don't have a great suggestion of how to prepare something right now. I don't. And I don't think Dawn does either. She has some general ideas, and that's why she referred to the IBCC on residential properties.
Does the city of Rehoboth have anything that we could piggyback on?
She couldn't find anything on them on demolition, things like that. The county has something for commercial properties,
Right,
but not residential.
right, yeah. But Bethany, Lewis, Rehoboth, they don't have anything? It's like
She
an
couldn't-
HOA, we're like a big HOA here, or?
Well, hey, that's what it comes down to. It almost
Right.
comes down to an architectural standard of what we want people to keep their homes at.
Yeah.
Well, some parts of it might be more appealing than others.
Right.
Yeah.
Like I looked through it and I thought, maybe the requirements around sanitation would be a good idea. Minimal standards around that as opposed to,
Right.
really looking at somebody's, structure and
It's funny, I looked and thought chapter 3, because it deals more with the exterior of a home, might be appropriate.
Yeah.
So what I'd like to present to the group is to say, is there somebody who'd like to maybe do a little more research and come back to us on what might be, if it's appropriate, right? Maybe we'll come to the conclusion that we want to do something, or maybe it's something very simple that just gives the town some ability to mitigate homes that are abandoned or not kept up, something like that. And then we can look at other code. I look at other code.
Particular point is that, first of all, if you're leaving your house empty, your insurer will take care of that. These are all like civic matters, and unless it becomes something that the town needs to be involved in. But we don't really have a big issue of people leaving their properties unattended. I think people are, thankfully for all of us, because we've all been involved with the government for a long time in Dewey, and I think we have a lovely town. It's not really an issue. So the issue of like thinking to yourself like, okay, I see a house. If I see a house in Washington where there's a bunch of junk, the windows are, I know she's a hoarder, I'm calling social services. And in this time, if we see issues, if there's trash on the street, the town is taking care of that. If there's issues with them having too many people, then you call the police. This is definitely what I'd say is not a problem and not something we need to be involved with at this point. We have other things to deal with.
Do we have any standards and guidelines?
We have to, because I remember Chicago Street, the town went to the owner and said, your house is in disarray, there's trash everywhere, in the backyard.
So trash is one thing, right?
Abandoned cars, rusted,
Right, but when it comes to a house that's not being kept and there's animals living in it, cats, other things, and the door's off its hinges and it's laying down on the ground, and the
was
house
one
is
on-
falling apart, the town right now has nothing they can do about it.
Because they did something about that one. They did something about the one on Bay Vista. Or Hayden, or whichever one's down that way. And they
What-
did the property at the
No,
corner.
there was a home on Buena.
Yeah.
It was on Buena, and yes, I know that one very well because I got pretty much involved in it. And it was occupied. They would come in and do the bare minimum to get through. But again, the only thing we could get them for was really mowing their lawn and cleaning up the trash, and that's what they would do. And eventually they sold it. So that solved that. We have one other home that is it's owned by somebody, and it's been in the family for years. It's not occupied. They own the property, they own it all, and it's an elderly woman, and we've dealt with this in the past. And I think that's the one that draws attention to some of our commissioners that we might want to consider doing something about it.
Well, like my husband says, which I think is brilliant, a one-time issue, do you make a big rule over it? Or just deal with it? You know, a new thing, you know, because if it's not a big problem in Dewey, just let's deal with it. And I think that like in that particular situation, you call social services. There are Sussex County places that you can call, not just, you know, you, Jim, or you, Bill. So it's just like, I don't think that we really need to get into this issue about, you know, what's okay in,
So let me ask this question. So Elaine, I get you're not. Marcia, do you have any comment on this one?
No, I'm just listening, and I would tend to agree with Elaine. When I read it, I just thought it was way too much for us to tackle when we have so many other issues. And I do agree that it's a one-off. We have one or two properties like this, and this is a agenda item for several meetings.
Yeah, so I just, my only thought today, I understand. So my only thought was, we don't have something in front of us that we can really, what I just wanted to get from the group is there an interest in pursuing something? Maybe it's not this code, maybe it's part of this, maybe it's not, but is there some generic thing that we want to come up with, do some research and come back with? And I was going to ask for somebody from the group to maybe take that on and do some research. If there's interest, if there's not,
Well, I was thinking, when I looked at that, does the town have the resources to even take on any of these things? I don't want us to put something out there that we don't have the staff to then implement and follow something that we, that we
right. I agree. I think
pass.
we can all agree that the property maintenance code, this standard here is probably more than we want to take on or do.
Well,
And I don't
even
think it even applies to all.
right,
this,
but even something smaller. I mean, did Jim and do you guys think that we even have the capacity to, I don't know, enforce, I don't know, not so much sanitation, but
So we get a complaint about grass growing and
Yeah.
it gets up to about 2.5, 3 feet. One of us, it's Dawn, sits down and writes a letter, certified letter, and it goes to the property owner, tell them you gotta cut the grass, and we give them so many days to do it. And if they don't, if we have to hire somebody to come in and do it, we're gonna bill them. If they don't pay the bill, then we're gonna put a lien on their property. And then the same thing happens, there's a couple structures in town, there's not many, but there's a couple of them that are just falling apart. And we just thought that this might be something that your committee could look at and maybe come up with a solution, that's all. Right now, all we can do is tell them to cut the grass.
if that's the case, we'll do anything to make sure life is easier for you and Jim. Because I couldn't imagine a better town manager and a better code guy. So you tell us what you would like.
yeah, because anything more than a warning about the grass could become pretty time consuming for your office.
I would like to give them something they can put their teeth into and say, look, this is our code, you're breaking it.
Yeah,
But then
right.
you get into fines.
You have
if
to
they
give them
don't do
something.
it.
So you have to give them something to enforce.
Right.
And so right now, they really don't have something to enforce.
Right, but if we give them something to enforce, do they have the capacity to then enforce?
Well, it depends on what the language is. We don't do internal inspections. We're not, the town isn't set up to do those kind of inspections internally. we rely on the property owners to take care of it. And quite frankly, a lot of the rental homes, the realtors really do a pretty good job of managing that. This is a little different. It is just a couple of properties, and usually what happens is when they sell it, it's resolved. That's unfortunately, this property has been, we've actually met with the owner, actually the owner's son, and tried to convince him that maybe it would be a good idea to consider selling. And that didn't go well. And they swore that they were going to take the time to fix up certain things. Never happened. And now the mother who owns the property took the son off the ability to make decisions. So she now is the only person that we can deal with. And
I think, yeah, Jim, I think the bottom line is there's homes that are in disrepair and they are falling apart, and it's an issue for the town. But if the folks in town don't think it's a problem, except the neighbors that live around those houses that don't want to have the animals coming in and out, then we won't deal with it. But there's nothing we can do about it right now.
Can you write down what you want to enforce? Like give that back to us and say, this is what we would like to enforce?
Well, I think Dawn tried to do that, and she came up with what we gave you today.
Yeah, I mean, it's the whole, and she brought it up and said, here's something to look at. I think we all kind of look and say, this is much more than we want to get into. But I'm just going to suggest if it's external of a house, the way something looks at, is there something that we could maybe try and frame out? So it does, Kate's moved up here that the town council can define, right? There's some things, I guess, in the code, section 25.
It's in the charter.
In the charter. But I don't think we've actually defined it.
Yeah, this just gives the town council the right to create legislation around nuisances, obstructions, or unsanitary conditions, even if it is a private property.
Okay.
So the charter says that they have the power to create legislation around what you're talking about, essentially.
When I was bored one day, I decided to look at the old ordinances going way back when the town was created. And the town commissioners did cite nuisance homes.
Yeah.
And they required them to make certain repairs. But that's the best we could find. But
So-
it was there. The town did do that.
Okay, I love that. Love that. So, anyway,
So I guess,
that,
I think we're not prepared to make any kind of recommendation here tonight. I didn't expect we would be. So, do I have a volunteer that would maybe work with Jim and Dawn to try and define a nuisance property?
I definitely would do it.
Thank you, Elaine. So let's leave it this way. We'll table the issue for tonight. I'm going to ask for a vote to table it. And then we'll let
Can I bring up one other thing I'd like to work with the town about?
Sure.
The snow removal and making sure that all people recognize that they're liable for, and something I'll work with the town with, because I think the snow removal, it was a horrible season, but the town doesn't have the money to do independent and places where the snow wasn't removed.
Okay. So so we're going to leave Elaine in your hands, defining a nuisance property and snow removal with the town. And when you're ready, come back to us with a recommendation. And then I'll put it on the agenda and we can discuss and see if it's something we want to embrace and make recommendations. Is that agreeable to everyone?
Yep.
Okay, so could I just get a vote to table the issue for tonight? Or
I'll make a motion to table the issue
Thank you,
until
David.
next month.
Second?
Second.
Thank you, Marcia. Let's vote. Jimmy?
Yes.
Diane?
Yes.
David?
Yes.
I'm going to vote yes. Marcia?
Yes.
Elaine?
Yes, of course, thanks.
Okay, so we're going to table the ocean. With that, I think we've completed everything on the agenda. So I'm going to go ahead and ask.
Recommendation to.
There you go. I need a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Meeting adjourned. Meeting adjourned.
Woo.
Bye, guys.
Bye.